So a couple of months ago, I was sitting in a cafe and I heard a woman at the table next to me turn to her companion and whisper, "He's the fat one off the Gruen transfer." Now, I don't know where she learned to whisper. I can only imagine it was inside a helicopter. But you know what? I can live with that. I am the fat one off the Gruen transfer. I'm not sure how to take that response. I was thinking I would get some response from the feelers, you know, there'd be an outward outpouring of love, and that the thinkers would mutter under their breath, "Fair enough, you fat git, buy a salad." But then a few weeks ago, I was on a winery tour in the Barossa Valley in South Australia, and the woman on the tour bus next to me turns to me and says, "I know you off TV, don't I?" And because I'm a bit up myself, I said, "Well, possibly." And she said, "I knew it, you're Mike from Mike and Molly, aren't you?" So this is Mike from Mike and Molly. So now, I'm not even the fat one off the Gruen transfer, I'm just generic fat guy off TV. What makes this worse is, I spent 20 years working as a creative director in the advertising industry, so those of you who are fans of Mad Men will know that this is what I'm supposed to look like. Yeah, you think you're disappointed. But I've essentially spent my whole life studying human behaviour. At university, I studied psychology, sociology, philosophy, religion. Basically, I'm obsessed with what makes people do the things that they do, which is why it's so good to be with you guys today, because I feel I'm amongst my peers. You know, we're all delving into what makes us do the thing. What are the things that make us pull our strings? What are the things that make us do the things we do? What is it that makes our staff, our customers, our partners, our children, what makes them do what they do? And I want to talk to you a little bit about what I've learned about human drive. What drives us as a people? How can we be more engaging, more persuasive, more influential? And I'm going to talk a little bit about why we need to be more engaged in this question of what is driving human beings. What's making us do what we do? You know, Cameron already talked a little bit about it this morning. The fact that we're living in an age of unprecedented change. Don't you think? Just 20 years ago, my business partners and I were the only people we knew who had email addresses. Classic early adopters, right? The only people we could send email to was each other. Spent the whole day going, "Can I borrow your pencil?" Send. Do you get it? And yet, I now approve video content that gets emailed to my iPhone as a YouTube link. 20 years. Just long enough for one generation to reach adulthood, and the world has changed in ways none of us could have predicted. And we say things like we like change, don't we? We say things like, "Oh, change is as good as a holiday." We don't really mean that. Just try putting change in a staff member's remuneration package in place of their annual leave. Yeah, we'll see how far that gets you. In fact, human beings, even those of us that are early adopters, fundamentally resist change. It's part of our evolutionary history. Change has often been threatening in our past, so we resist it. When Coca-Cola changed their formula and invented New Coke, it almost destroyed their business. People don't like change. Every time Facebook changes their layout, people lose their minds. Burger King took the Whopper off the menu for one day in 2010, and this is what happened.
Burger King doesn't have the Whopper, they might go change the name to Burger Queen.
So we're not big fans of change. But change is coming at us whether we like it or not. And a lot of this change is being driven by the digital revolution. We're connecting to each other in ways we haven't before. We're connecting to groups of people we haven't been able to connect to before. This is changing virtually every business I work with. And I work with a different business or a different industry every day of the week. Think about how we buy music today versus how we used to buy music just a few years ago. Or how we buy books today. You know, I released a new book at the beginning of the year. It's my third book. The first two books I released, I used to go to bookstores and do book signings. You don't do that anymore. There aren't any bookstores. It's actually become hard to find a bookstore. It's changing every business. Even businesses that are built on human face-to-face relationships are fundamentally changing. 20 years ago, if you wanted to know what houses were for sale in a particular suburb, you had to go and have a conversation with a real estate agent. That doesn't happen today. Today, you go to domain.com.au or realestate.com.au. You have a look at what houses are for sale in that suburb. You have a look at the price differential for the suburb. You have a look at the layout of the house. You have a look at the photographs of the room. You do a virtual tour. You've been inside the house. You haven't even spoken to anyone. It's fundamentally changing the way we connect. It's even changing us at a values and a cultural level. Today in the United States, 1 in 5 married couples found each other through online dating. 1 in 5. We used to get dressed up or put on makeup or shave before we went on a date. Today we're all learning how to use Photoshop. Take that, Daniel Craig. Right, this is changing the way we connect. It's changing the way we form our values. It's changing the way we build communities. You know, communities are no longer geographically defined, they're values based. I was just in Perth a couple of weeks ago working with entrepreneurs. I had 500 entrepreneurs in the room. And in the break, at the morning tea break, I had two young girls come up to me. They were quite tall. They're of Dutch descent, so they were almost as tall as I was. But I could see from their faces they were very young. And they handed me their business cards. And I said, if you don't mind, how old are you guys? And they said, we're 12 and 14. I said, tell me about these business cards. The 12-year-old has an e-publishing business where she collects e-fiction from girls her age and publishes to a global network of girls that age. The 14-year-old has a global fashion business where she sources clothes from all around the world that make 14-year-old girls feel good about their bodies, and she sells to that market globally. We are connected in ways we have never been before. You know, Perth is the most isolated capital city on the planet, and a 12 and 14-year-old are building a global business out of it. Social networking is now the #1 internet activity ahead of porn. I'll say that again, I think some of you missed that. #1 internet. Apparently today we really do just want to be friends. You know, and this isn't some Gen Y thing. The fastest growing group on Facebook is 55 to 65-year-old women. Nana is poking people online. By population, Facebook is now the 3rd largest nation on earth in just a decade. Imagine what Zuckerberg will be capable of by the time he hits puberty. Fundamentally changing the way we connect to each other, the way we share information, the way values are informed. I was just talking to Martin earlier. Has anyone here read The Filter Bubble? Well, I'll give you a quick précis of what the book's about. The Filter Bubble essentially talks about the fact that the internet reads the way we use the internet. In other words, it looks at our cookies, it looks at where we've been, and then instead of giving us a diversity of opinion, it feeds our own opinion back to us. If you're a conservative, if you do a Google search on an issue, all of the opinions that come to you will be conservative. If you're liberal, exactly the same thing. So rather than having this incredibly diverse worldview, we have far more binary views. So we've got a world of information available to us, but we're only hearing our own opinion coming back to us. The other thing that's happening, though, is we're more exposed than ever before. People can now see further inside our organisations. They have more power to challenge us, to hold us accountable. If the CIA can't keep a secret, none of us can. But it's also changing the power in the way business gets done. Today, TripAdvisor is the most powerful travel organisation on the planet. It's not an airline, it's not a hotel group. It's a social network that produces nothing. All they do is curate the opinions of people who travel, who stay in hotels, who fly with airlines. This is an opportunity, but it also means that we need to better understand the people that we're interacting with. Understanding what's driving human behaviour is more important than it's ever been before. Because the other thing that's going on is their expectations are getting higher and higher and higher. Who's seen expectation inflation in their staff or in their customers? People's expectations getting higher and higher. Thank you, extroverts. Putting your hands up. The introverts are my people. I don't put my hand up either. But I think this expectation inflation is obvious everywhere. And I found a formula that I think represents it brilliantly. It's basically that disappointment equals expectation divided by reality. Isn't that true? I think that's true. I mean, think about it. The hamburger that you buy never quite looks like the one in the window, does it? The snowman you build yourself, nothing like the Christmas card. Firemen sadly never live up to the calendar. And I'll be honest with you, the less said about this picture, the better. But here's the thing, as expectations go up and up and up, it's easier than ever to disappoint people. It's easier than ever to let people down, to disappoint our staff, to anger our customers. What it also means is good is no longer good enough. It's no longer good enough just to do what it says on the tin, just to offer a good service, to develop a good product. Good is table stakes. Good is the cost of entry. We're now increasingly defined by the value we create above and beyond good. The intangible value, the value that we create above and beyond the utilitarian or the functional. That's what's defining us. Does anyone remember when the first iPhone launched in Australia? The fact that it couldn't send an MMS. Remember that? Now, at the time it launched, even the cheapest, nastiest phone on the marketplace could send a picture file to another phone. And yet people lined up through the night. They camped out, not to buy concert tickets, but for the opening of a retail store to buy a phone that didn't work. But it said something about who I was, didn't it? It said I was an early adopter of technology. It said I was cool. It said I was hip. Does anyone here own a Philippe Stark orange juicer? This will reveal the personality. Just the advertising wanker. Excellent. Now look, it does work. It will totally take the juice out of an orange, and some of it actually goes into your glass. It does make your kitchen counter, wall and floor look like an orange serial killer's been at work, and it costs $150 to juice an orange. But again, it's not about juicing the orange. It's about what it says about my design aesthetic, what it says about the environment I want to create at home, the impression I want to make on people when they come to visit. That's where the value is, because it's all margin. The value is in who you help me to be, not what you help me to do. Who do you help me to be? That's the fundamental question that's driving marketing success, business success. Understanding who you help your staff and your customers to be. It's also changing the way we do business. Because the other trend we're seeing is business modification. In other words, the way we make money, the way we do business is changing. Services are having to productize what they do. Products are becoming service-based. Virtually every industry is flipping its model on its head. Certainly happened in the industry. I used to work in the advertising industry. You know, 30 years ago when I began my advertising career, this is what my secretary was supposed to look like. This is not what my secretary looks like today. This is what my secretary looks like in 2015. I mean, I've updated the wallpaper. This is what my office was supposed to look like when I began my career. This is what my office looks like today. And you know what? This is the model of leadership I was promised when I began my career. Me at the top, obedient minions beneath me. But that's not the model of leadership that showed up. In fact, I don't think very many of us have that model of leadership available to us anymore. I was recently doing an innovation consult for a military consortium. And as you can imagine, a military consortium is usually a group of 20 or 30 military men in a room. And as you can imagine, when a group of military guys get into the room, there's a lot of posturing going on. A lot of who's the biggest, who's the toughest, that kind of thing. Fortunately, I watched a lot of Jean-Claude Van Damme movies as a kid, so I reckon I held my own. But as this posturing was going on, the door at the back of the room opened up, and this old guy in chinos and a polo shirt entered the room, and the posturing stopped, and the bragging stopped, and the boasting stopped. And I said to the Special Forces guy I was talking to, "Who's that?" And he said, "That's Major General Jim Molan. He's a legend." Now, it turns out Jim ran the war in Iraq. Didn't just run the Australian contingent, he ran the entire war. The Australians, the Canadians, the Brits, the Poles, the Americans. And I wanted to get a sense of him. How did you get such a diverse group of people? Different nationalities, different languages, different religions, different value systems, different military disciplines. How did you get them to work together as a cohesive whole? And it turns out Jim's a bit of a Gruen transfer fan, so we had a fantastic conversation. And he's kind of this old school guy. He reminded me of my grandfather. You know, Jim's like a real man. Jim's the kind of guy they base those Chuck Norris facts on. You know, when Jim Molan does push-ups, he doesn't lift himself up, he pushes the world down. He's that guy. And he said to me, "You know what, Dan? I lead the most highly disciplined, the most well-resourced, the most well-trained, obedient workforce on the planet. And it was my honour to serve with them." And then he eyeballed me. He said, "Dan, what kind of people do you command?" And I said, "Creative people, Jim." And Jim Molan looked at me and he said, "You poor bastard." Because Jim Molan knows if he ever gives an order, his people will snap to attention and say, "Sir, yes, sir." If I was ever to give my people anything resembling an order, they would tell me to go and do something to myself that might be a lot more enjoyable if another participant was involved. You know what? I think that's the kind of leadership we're all faced with today. The hierarchy is dead. Today, what defines our leadership is our capacity to create cultures of the willing, cultures of the voluntary, cultures of the enthusiastic. And that's why it starts with understanding who we're dealing with, what drives them, what makes them want to be a participant in whatever we're about. One of the things that gets in the way of us understanding that is that we actually deny and fight against human nature. We don't like dealing with the truth. We like to cover it up. We like to deal with ideals, not the way things really are. One of the great things about growing up in Australia is you learn two things about swimming in the ocean. The first thing you learn is always swim next to an English backpacker. Because you may not be able to outswim a shark, but hey, maybe you don't have to. The second thing you learn is, if you ever get caught up in a riptide, swim with and across the current. Because if you swim against the current, you become exhausted and you'll drown. But we do that all the time with human behaviour. We swim against the current. We try and force people to change who they are to fit our view of how things should be, as opposed to understanding who they are and aligning our processes to work with them, supporting them to bring their own exceptionalism to work. That's a far more intelligent way of driving human behaviour. And one of the reasons we deny and work against human nature is because our survival brain, the most primitive part of our brain, still calls dibs on all of our decision making. We don't like to think about that. The amygdala, that really primitive part of our brain, that part of our brain that sounds like Russell Crowe. Go on, Dan, get another beer in, you'll be right, mate. It still calls dibs on our decision making, and the reason it does is it has to. It's about survival. It doesn't have time for higher cognitive function. It needs to make instant, reflex decisions. This is still driving us, but we like to think that we're highly evolved, don't we? Has anyone seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs? This is what was supposed to happen. We're supposed to satisfy all of our survival needs and then migrate up through the pyramid to becoming self-actualized. That didn't happen. Now, I'm sure there's some people in the room that do think they're self-actualized. Come on, Dan, I own a yoga mat and drink chai tea. I'm heaps self-actualized. But that's not what happened at all. In fact, Maslow rejected this model on his deathbed. What happened was our survival brain stayed in charge, and we moved from needs to wants. We didn't migrate up through the pyramid. We just added some storage space on the ground floor. Let me prove this to you rather than me just asserting it. The American Journal of Psychology did a whole bunch of studies, but one of the most interesting ones was they had a look at people reversing out of parking spaces in parking lots. And what they found was, over and over and over again, when a human being reverses out of a parking space, if there's another car waiting to take the space, we reverse out more slowly, even though it fights against our primary goal of getting out and getting on with our lives, because we become territorial. Our survival brain takes over, and we unconsciously act out of our survival instinct. That's a critical problem, because we don't like to think that happens. And that means we're all a little bit delusional about the way we behave. Just have a look around the room. These are your peers in the room. What I'd like you to do is put your hand up if you believe you're below average competence compared to the room. Put your hand up if you're below average competence compared to the rest of the room. 2 hands at the back of the room. Let me explain to you how statistics work. Half of the room should now have their hands up in the air. So we've proved the room is delusional. Okay, here's another interesting statistic. 50% of the Australian population was in the bottom half of the class. I always need to let that sit for a while because I can never be sure which half of the class is in the room. I mean, I'm not saying this is geographically correct. I mean, what are the odds of Queensland being in the top half? Any Queenslanders in today? Sorry. Hi guys, I'll speak more slowly. But let's forget about the bottom half of the class. Let's talk about average. Here's the thing, the average man in the street is in fact pretty average. Now I work with universities and schools all around the world, and whenever we grade people, we always use the standard deviation graph. Has everyone seen the bell curve before? It looks the same everywhere in the world. Here's the thing, it doesn't look like that before we standardise. In fact, before we standardise, it looks more like this. There's a few people above average, a whole pile of average around 50%, some people who are below average, and then one person down the end who is technically a potato. But let's assume standard deviation. Let's assume average sits between 60 and 70%, where it does for everyone. 65%. Average is 65%. Here's what that means. The average person, your average member of staff, your average customer, your average client gets 1 in 3 decisions wrong. We don't like to think about that though, do we? That's assuming that all decisions are equally weighted. That did you pick the kids up from the pool is equivalent to do you want fries with that? 1 in 3 decisions wrong. We don't engineer for human behaviour, we engineer for human ideals. That gets us into trouble because human ideals rarely show up. The other thing that this all leads to is the fact that design beats discipline and motivation. None of us are motivated all of the time. None of us are disciplined in every area of our lives, and yet discipline and motivation are the things we as leaders lean on most heavily. I just need to create KPIs for my people so that they can live up to them. I just need to motivate the staff, rev them up at the annual conference, and then they'll be motivated for the next 364 days. Problem is, discipline and motivation are short-term strategies. And the underlying environment, the process or the system that you build to support your people is more powerful than their capacity to be disciplined or motivated. In other words, it's more important to be a strategic leader than it is to be an inspirational leader. How do you build support for the result that you want? Because again, when we're delusional and we just rely on inspiration or good intentions, that's when we run into failure. Let's just check with the room. How many people here think saving money for the future is a good idea? How many people here? Okay, pretty much everyone in the room. A couple of introverts didn't want to put their hands up, but it's most of the room. How many people here believe that if they don't save for the future, they're going to have a very unpleasant retirement? Most of the room. Okay. So we all think saving is a good idea. We know that it's important. Rationally, we get it. Emotionally, we're bought in. How many people here in the room have more money in voluntary savings, things like shares and bonds, than they do in forced savings, things like their mortgage and their superannuation? More money in voluntary savings versus forced savings. Yeah, a few nervous hands going up. We don't act the way we think we should. You know, our walk doesn't match our talk. We all believe that saving's a great idea, but none of us do it unless we're forced to. In other words, the design, the underlying environment, the process that we've built supports us living up to what we say is important. More important than discipline and motivation. I'll give you another example of how design beats discipline and motivation. Every year, whenever my business partner Kieran and I sit down and do our goals at the beginning of a year, we share them with each other so we can hold each other accountable. So at the beginning of 2014, my goal was to spend more time at home. I fly every day. I'm in a different city every day. I don't spend a lot of time at home. So that was my goal for the year. We got to the end of the year and we looked at what we'd done, and what we realised was it didn't matter how disciplined I was about closing my computer down and getting on the road, or how motivated I was to spend more time at home. It didn't show up in my behaviour. I wasn't spending any more time at home. So we sat down and we did the numbers. What we found was I've got an hour's commute to work and an hour's drive back home. That's 2 hours a day, 10 hours a week, roughly one long work day every week, times 52 weeks, factor in weekends. That's 2 whole months every year that I'm not at home. Discipline won't solve that problem. Motivation can't solve that problem. It's design failure. If all I did was move where I live half an hour closer to where I work, or move where I work half an hour closer to where I live, I instantly, with no more discipline, no more motivation, get an extra month at home every year. Again, it's not asking me to change, it's working with who I am. Understanding who I am and designing a system that supports the result that I want to get. That's how design beats discipline and motivation. So we talked about what's happening in human behaviour, what's driving us. I'm now going to talk about how we work with those fundamental drives in human behaviour. And the first drive I want to talk about is the need for identity congruence. We act out of a need to be identity congruent. And that's because identity drives all of our behaviour. Who we think we are and who we want to project to the world that we are drives every decision we make. Let me just step back and run you through a little of the history of the behavioural sciences. Now, it really kicked off in the 1600s with Blaise Pascal and decision theory. And Pascal's theory was that human beings look at all of their available options, then they weigh up the pros and cons, and then people make the most logical decision possible. How's that working for you? Of course, that's not what people do at all. And you know, a little while later, people like Daniel Goleman came along and said, no, it's not just about intellectual intelligence, it's also about emotional intelligence. EQ is just as important as IQ. And of course, he's right. Everything we do is filtered through how that decision will ultimately make us feel. Now, of course, we post-rationalise our emotional decisions, don't we? We make sense of them once they've happened. There's a lot of men in the advertising industry driving around in Porsches that can tell you all about Porsche's racing heritage, German engineering and aerodynamics, but all we're really after is some special hugs from women half our age. But we like to post-rationalise that very emotional decision. But then people started wondering, well, hang on, what's the most important emotion if we want to engage people? What's the most important question we can ask if we want to be persuasive, if we want to be influential? And people like Simon Sinek came along and said, well, it's all about why. Why drives how, which determines what. Viktor Frankl said exactly the same thing 50 years earlier in Man's Search for Meaning. With a big enough why, you can achieve any what. And they're right. The problem with why is it's often temporary. Anyone who's ever been on a diet knows exactly what I'm talking about. You know, if you've got a big enough why, maybe a school reunion or a wedding or a hot date, you can lose the weight, right? You get on the treadmill, you eat nothing but lettuce, and you look fabulous. But then 6 months goes by and the why disappears. And all of a sudden you're back sitting on your sofa in your sweatpants, watching Oprah and eating chicken out of a bucket. Because at some point you remember, you're the fat one off the Gruen transfer. Identity is the most powerful thing in terms of human behaviour. It drives everything we do. It's the thing we need to be most conscious of, is who our people are and who we help them to be and how we align the two. This determines why we buy. If you work in sales, you need to understand who the people you're trying to engage are. Because people don't say, well, I bought a Macintosh computer, or I bought some Apple hardware. They say, I'm a Mac. They want to define themselves. They want to say, I'm a crazy one, I'm a misfit, I'm a round peg in a square hole. Mostly what they want to say is, I'm not a PC. This shows up everywhere in our behaviour. People buy dogs that look like them. People buy cars that look like them. There are kids in the United States with names like Mercedes and Lexus, and they need your help. We decide and we buy and we choose and we act in alignment with our identity. This is critical. And if you've got an identity that conflicts with mine, or if you've got an identity that I find challenging, really hard to engage with me. We did some work with Fantastic Furniture recently, and they actually make quite good furniture. It's cheap, but it's good. The problem is, for 20 years, all they've told us is we're cheap, we're cheap, we're cheap. And people don't like to think of themselves as being cheap, do they? What they told us was, when people buy from Fantastic Furniture, they actually ask for it to be delivered in an unmarked van at night time. That's pretty bad, because they don't understand the identity, what's driving the people they're looking to engage with, at least not fully. And it's the organisations who forget who they are, who forget about the identity they're creating, that are the ones that find themselves in trouble. That's what happened to Kodak. Kodak actually had a brilliant identity. I mean, anyone as old as I am might remember the ads from the 1970s where Mum walked into the pharmacy to get a film processed. Remember that ad? Actually, there's a few younger people in the room. Let me explain. In the olden days, we used to have to go into a pharmacy to get our film processed, and then a month later, our photos got posted to us. They're up to speed. Mum walks into the pharmacy, she puts the film down on the counter, the pharmacist gives her a replacement film, and she goes, oh, but that's not Kodak. And he says, oh, it's fine for snapshots. And she says, they may just be snapshots to you, Mr. Johnson, but to me, they're irreplaceable memories. That was the business Kodak were in. They were in the memory preservation business. That is a multi-billion-dollar piece of business in terms of data storage, in terms of cloud computing, in terms of USB technology, all of which Kodak helped develop. But they forgot the business that they were really in. They forgot the identity they were creating, and they focused just on producing product more cost-effectively and more efficiently, and it cost them their business. Identity drives every decision we make, and it's one of the things we're most unconscious about. You know, this actually drives our performance. You know, reputedly, Alcoholics Anonymous is the most successful behavioural change program anywhere in the world. And part of the reason it's successful is it changes people's identity. At the beginning of an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, you get up and you say, hi, my name is Dan, or John, or Sally, and I'm an alcoholic. You change your identity. Now that's important because there's a big difference between having a drinking problem and being an alcoholic. Because if you've got a bit of a drinking problem, you should probably cut back. But when you define yourself as an alcoholic, you can never take a drink again. Different order of conviction. Far more potent in terms of driving change. But it also works at a cultural level as well. You know, the NRMA in New South Wales, when they stopped talking about themselves, RACV for those of you from Melbourne, When they stop talking about themselves as being the old guys who show up when you've had a breakdown and jumpstart the battery in your car, and started talking about themselves as the fourth emergency service, fire brigade, police, ambulance, NRMA, it changed the way that people saw the work that they did. All of a sudden you weren't working in a call centre, you were working in driver triple O. All of a sudden you stopped seeing pictures of old guys jump-starting batteries and started seeing pictures of vulnerable young women on lonely country roads. They changed the way they saw the work they did. They changed the way they saw the importance of the work they did. They created a new identity for their people to live into. That's how identity drives change. It drives performance too. Second thing that drives us is the need for values alignment. Now this is linked to identity, but we need to align with the values of our team, the values of our customers, the values of our community and our constituents if we want to drive engagement. I was recently working with some pharmaceutical salespeople, and I had about 500 pharmaceutical salespeople in one room. I said, okay, let's find out how much you know about your customers. Can anyone here tell me what your customers, doctors, actually sell? Actually, I'll ask you guys, just yell it out. What do you think doctors sell? Service? Advice? Medicine? Cure? Drugs? Health? All the kind of answers they gave me. You were right. Doctors are professional services. Doctors sell time. If I go and see my Dr. Shane, he says, Dan, you're a diabetic with high blood pressure. He writes me a prescription, I walk out the front door, massive stroke, drop dead. I didn't get health. I didn't get hope. Shane got paid. I didn't make it to the pharmacy to get my drugs. Shane got a selfish prick. Here's why that matters. Every single one of those pharmaceutical salespeople is on the phone every day. What's the one thing they ask doctors to give them for free? They ask for time. We infringe on people's values all of the time because we don't understand them well enough. I was working with some optometrists recently. I said, can anyone here tell me what business you're in? And they all said, oh, we're all eye doctors, Dan. We're all in medical services. I said, oh, that's interesting. Where's the money? Where do you make the margin? Do you make the money in the back room going, blurry, less blurry, blurry, less, 5 years at university to do that, blurry, less blurry. And they all said, well, no, the consults cover the costs, but we actually make all of our real money selling frames. And I said, oh, so you're not in medical services, you're all in retail fashion. And they all looked at me like, 5 years at university, and this guy tells me I work at Katie's. But I said, how have you decorated your practices? Are they decorated like a fashion boutique that's inviting? I want to go in, spend some time browsing, trying stuff on. Or are they decorated like a medical clinic that's intimidating and I don't want to go inside unless I have to? How have you arranged your frames in store? Are they arranged by face shape so I know it's going to make me look good? Or by season so I know it's going to make me look fashionable? Or are they arranged generically by brand? And where do you spend your training budget? Do you spend your training budget on yourself so you can do the blurry, less blurry thing more efficiently? Or do you spend it on the 19-year-old who's sitting up front updating her Facebook status when she's your sales department, the source of all your profit? The thing is, they're so locked into what their identity is that they don't understand their customer's identity. They spend all their time, money, and focus on the wrong things. We all do, because we don't understand the values of the people we're looking to engage well enough. And the most successful organizations understand that engagement starts with values alignment. Understanding what's driving people. McDonald's knows that Happy Meals aren't about nuggets and French fries and a little plastic toy. They're about 15 minutes to shut up on the way home. That's what McDonald's is selling. I found this ad in my local newspaper for a local florist. It had a single rose, a small bunch of roses, and a big bunch of roses with the headline, "Just how sorry are you?" This person understands their customers. They know what drives them. You know, one of the things I do when I'm not speaking to audiences like this or not running my business with my business partner, Kieran, is I'm on the board of White Ribbon, which is the campaign to end men's violence against women. And I got involved with White Ribbon for 2 reasons. Essentially, it's one reason, though. They aligned their goals with my values. They didn't tell me about the good work they were doing, about why they were important. They aligned it with what was important to me. First reason I got involved is because of a poster I saw in a marketing textbook when I was a 19-year-old university student. Simple but confronting headline. It simply read, 1 in 4 women will be raped in her lifetime. Will it be your mother, your sister, your daughter, or your wife? Floored me. From that moment on, my little sister never had to worry about a ride home, no matter what time of night it was. My then girlfriend always found me outside her college classes at night to walk her home. And I still walk my business partner Kieran to her car every night after work. Not because I'm a nice guy, but because they made women's safety a man's issue. They made women's safety my issue. They aligned their objectives with my values. First reason I got involved. Second reason I got involved is this little person, my goddaughter Darcy. She's amazing. She's such a clever little girl. She's really smart. I mean, I'd love her if she was stupid, but I'll be honest, I'd love her less. Is that wrong? Her mum's my business partner, Kieran, and Kieran and I were recently in Kuala Lumpur working with some businesses in Asia. And Kieran and her husband, Gary, decided to go out and do some shopping. So Darcy and I had breakfast together in the hotel. And she's sitting across the table from me and she says, Dan, I am 4 years of age, but very soon I'll be 5, then 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, and it will go past very quickly. And I said, well, I hope it doesn't go past too quickly, Darcy. And she said, why? And I said, well, what if you grow up so much that you don't need your godfather anymore? And she reached her little hand across the table, put it on top of mine and said, Dan, we will always need each other. I picked up the phone and called her mum. I said, dude, you need a bigger place because someone's getting a pony. Here's the thing. I'm involved for selfish reasons. I'm not involved for all women. I'm involved for the world I want her to inherit. They aligned their objectives with my values, with what was important to me. We spend so much time talking about how great we are. Let me tell you about my features, my benefits. Let me tell you about my experience, my product. We should be talking about them. You know, sales, engagement, it's a listening skill, far more than it is a broadcast skill. The more we understand people, the greater the capacity to engage we have. Third thing we need to think about, the need for social connection. You know, it's about where do we fit? Who do we align ourselves with in this world? What does our tribe look like? It's one of the things that's the most difficult for large organisations to do. Because we all want to drive collaboration in our businesses, don't we? We all say collaboration's important. Oftentimes, Kieran and I will go in and do organisational audits of businesses, and what we find is individuals, departments and entire silos set up in opposition with each other. KPIs that exist that only work if someone else in the organisation fails catastrophically. We see this everywhere. And I think it means that we need to move beyond this idea of tolerance towards acceptance and actually an embracing of the different personality types in our organisations. Because oftentimes we have people, you know, a CEO will say to us, oh, we've got heaps of diversity. And then they introduce me to a female version of themselves, a Chinese version of themselves, an Indian version of themselves. Oh, we're heaps diverse. Right? Tolerance is an awful word. Just turn to the person next to you and say, I tolerate you so much. Let me know if that sounds like a compliment. Here's what tolerance means. Tolerance means I don't like you, I don't respect you, but I have to put up with you, otherwise HR will make me do a course. Tolerance is a terrible word. Open collaboration is a far better idea. And it's not about getting along, it's not about being respectful. It's actually about understanding that different people bring different things to the table. My favourite example from collaboration anywhere in the world is the Eurotunnel. That was between the English and the French. Two cultures not famous for getting along. The English still show up at soccer games in France chanting Agincourt, Agincourt, Agincourt about a battle they won in 1415. Talk about holding a grudge. I like to imagine that while the English were digging this tunnel, the Germans were off to one side going, oh, you English, always with the tunnels. Here's the thing, open collaboration. The more diverse a group is, the more personality types you can put together in the same room, working together, are smarter. MIT did a study, and what they found was the more diverse a group is, the more they share information, the higher the collective intelligence. One of the studies they did was they took a homogenous group of only men. They added one woman to the group, and the collective IQ went up. Big surprise, right, ladies? They added another woman to the group, and the IQ went up again. Imagine. In fact, they kept adding women to the group, and the IQ kept going up until the homogeny balance tipped back the other way, and the IQ came back down again. It wasn't that women made the group smarter, it's that diversity of opinion made the group smarter. One of the issues with really, really smart organisations and really, really smart people is they suffer from contextual blindness. In other words, they know so much about the way things should be done, about the way things have been done, that they can't see how things might be done. And oftentimes, the solution is available to us if we only go outside our limited circle of experience or our very narrow selection of personality types in our team. The Great Ormond Street Hospital had a critical problem a few years ago, transferring people from the operating theatre to the recovery ward. It was an almost 40% error rate. Now, it wasn't catastrophic stuff. It was stuff like filing wasn't being done correctly. But I think we can all agree, in an emergency department, 40% error rate is pretty bad. And they couldn't figure out how to bring the error rate down. Smart people, they couldn't find a solution. What they did was they went outside the hospital. They found someone who was an expert in doing quick, highly important, critical transitions. So they spoke to the pit crew boss of Ferrari's Formula One racing team. And he came in, he watched them perform operation after operation after operation. No medical training, no idea about hospital administration. Within 6 months, he took them from a 40% error rate to a less than 10% error rate. He didn't have contextual blindness. He could see what no one else could see because he had a different personality type, because he had a different background, because he had different experience. The trademark office in the US tells us that over the past 50 to 100 years, the most successful innovations haven't been developments of new technology. There have been two pieces of technology that already existed that were combined. A lot of the opportunity for your industry will come from outside your industry. A lot of the wealth of your team will come from outside your personality type. You know, Kieran and I have always tried to hire people that were a little bit irritating. Because the people who are the most irritating are the people who can see your weakness and just do that to it. It's important that we get used to that. That diversity makes us smarter. Fourth thing that drives us is our need for acknowledgement. We all like to be acknowledged, don't we? To feel that we're special. Every year, whenever my little brother sends me a birthday card, it's always got the same 4 words written on it. To Dan, FM, Bruce. He abbreviates from. Now, Mum's a bit sensitive, so last year she said to him, "Oh, come on, Bruce, Dan always writes such nice cards. Can't you put in a little bit more effort?" So this year, 5 days late, I got to Dan, FM, Bruce, happy birthday. Now, you may laugh, but to me, that's a 50% improvement, and I'm feeling the love. But we all like to be acknowledged. We like to be acknowledged in business. We like to be acknowledged for stuff. One of the most powerful, one of the most motivating statements you can make to a member of your staff is, "What do you think?" Not only does it acknowledge the other person's presence in the room, it acknowledges their capacity to contribute. What do you think? Business can acknowledge people. When Mini launched the Mini car in the United States, it sold every Mini car with a key fob that had an RFID chip in it with your personal information recorded on it. Works a little bit like Bluetooth technology. Every time you drove past a Mini dealership or past a Mini poster, it knew you were in the car, it said hello to you. How do you acknowledge your people, your team, your community? Because we want to be acknowledged. We want to feel like we're special. This is Peter Shankman. Peter Shankman was on a 2-hour flight to Newark Airport in the United States, and he was hungry, so he tweeted a steakhouse in the US called Morton's. "Hey Morton's, I'm hungry. Meet me at Newark with a steak." In the 2 hours he was in the air, someone at Morton's saw that tweet, someone had an idea. Someone called head office and got permission for that idea. They then arranged for the nearest Morton's restaurant 23 miles away to get a guy in a tuxedo to drive to the airport, find out what flight Peter was on, wait at the gate holding a bag with some steak, some mashed potato and some garlic bread in it. That is no way to run a business. But what a great acknowledgement of customer. What's your perception of customer service now at Morton's Steakhouse? One story, one acknowledgement transforms your expectation of an entire business. How do we acknowledge people? Nordstrom, the way they train their customer service people is amazing. They don't give people rote scripts. You know, because we all know how customer service people get trained. You know, greet the customer with your eyes first, smile from the inside. It's all that stuff, right? They don't do that. They tell stories about exceptional service, about exceptional acknowledgement. They tell the story of the customer service clerk who had a young man come in to buy a business shirt because he was on his way to a job interview. So she whipped out the back and ironed the shirt for him. so he'd look good at the job interview. That's acknowledgement. That's exceptional. Lexus has some amazing stories. When Lexus had a problem with the Lexus 400, instead of doing a product recall, which is what most car companies would do, they divided their team up into small groups. They went out to each individual Lexus owner's home with a technician who fixed the problem there in the driveway, with an apology and with a gift. Can you imagine if your bank overcharged you on your account and they showed up at your house with a refund and apology, and here we made you a meatloaf? You would tell that story though, because that would be acknowledgement above and beyond. I said good is no longer good enough. It's not good enough. It's how do we acknowledge in a way that's exceptional, that's surprising, that's noticeable, that's genuine. I introduced you to Darcy a little while ago, my goddaughter. When Kieran asked me to be Darcy's godfather, at her baptism I bought her a charm bracelet. And every year I buy her a charm based on what we've done together that year. It's sort of a living diary of our lives. So this year she turned 7 and I let her select the charm for the first time. I took her to Tiffany. And what was amazing was the woman at Tiffany didn't treat her like a 7-year-old looking for a charm bracelet. She treated her like a 27-year-old looking for an engagement ring. She invited Darcy up to the counter. She unrolled that pale blue velvet. She took the box from under the counter. She put it on the velvet, took the lid off, got a pair of tweezers, lifted the charm out of the box and put it down on the velvet for Darcy to examine. Do you think that little girl is going to accept jewellery from anywhere other than Tiffany? That 7-year-old knew what being acknowledged felt like. So did the 46-year-old standing behind her with the open wallet. Do you think I cared that that charm was probably 50% more expensive where I was currently shopping? Absolutely not. It was about the acknowledgement that little girl was getting. We all like to be acknowledged. It drives us. And we're really bad at acknowledging those who we should. Those we care about, those we work with, customers who pay our bills. I was recently shopping at IKEA for some office furniture. Now, usually I hate IKEA. I even hate the Swedish because of IKEA. I mean, you go in looking for a bookcase, they bring in a flat pack box, hand you an Allen key and go, here, put that together yourself. It's like to rip up a $100 bill, hand it to them and go, here, put that together yourself. Here's some instructions in Chinese. But this particular time I liked IKEA. I walked in, it was pouring rain. Kieran and I we had to buy some office furniture, and we're dripping wet. And in the foyer of this particular IKEA, there was a sandwich board, a chalkboard, and handwritten in chalk, someone had written, it's raining outside. So we've cut the price of our umbrellas in half for you. All of a sudden I liked IKEA. I felt acknowledged. Simple, simple thing to do. How do you make people feel like they're special, like they're important? Fifth thing that drives us is the need to create, the need to invent. It's fundamental in our humanity. You know, it might be the drive to reproduce, to build a family. Or it might be the drive to create something new at work. And we're really good at shutting people's creativity down, aren't we? At some point in our lives, usually in childhood, we seem to decide that we either are creative or that we're not. Or rather, someone decides for us and we decide to believe them. I found a website that I think illustrates this beautifully and bluntly. It's called IamBetterThanYourKids.com. And this guy posts real children's artwork, like this fire engine by Jason, age 6. And then he critiques it mercilessly. Now, I reckon that's a pretty good fire engine for a 6-year-old. This is the review that it got. I've never seen a fire engine that needed to be shaved. I would rather be burned to death than saved by this hairy piece of crap. Now, clearly that's over the top. But when you're a kid, that's what criticism sounds like. Thinking judgmental types. That's what criticism sounds like. It sounds no better to an adult. We shut down people's creativity all of the time. When you shut down one person's creativity, you shut down an entire team because the story spreads. Yeah, this is a culture where you don't bring new ideas to the table. The first thing we should say, again, is back to acknowledgement. When someone on your team brings you a new idea, is say thank you. Even if it's rubbish, say thank you. Encourage them to bring new ideas to the table because ideas sometimes take time to come into their own. Does anyone here have Angry Birds on their phone? Anyone here played Angry Birds? Anyone here not know what Angry Birds is? I can't help you. Angry Birds is the most successful gaming app on Android and iPhone. Here's the thing. It was released 50 times before it succeeded. it succeeded on the 51st iteration. Anyone remember that song from the 1980s by a-ha, Take On Me? Anyone remember that? First time it was released, sold less than 100 copies. Second time it was released, it bombed again. Third time it was released, global #1 hit. Some ideas just take time. There's a reason we call it WD-40 and not WD-39. It's water displacement formula number 40. Some ideas just take time. And creativity is really just about a capacity to solve problems in ways we haven't seen before. Give you a couple of quick examples. Now, I'm sure a lot of the men in the room won't know what this is. It's a urinal fly. Basically, it's a sticker with a picture of a fly on it that gets placed on the porcelain at the point of preferred impact. Apparently, aim's a bit of an issue for some guys. Now, it looks a bit silly, it's a bit ridiculous, it's a bit stupid, but here's the thing. When they introduced these urinal flies at Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, it improved men's room cleanliness by 80%. Yeah, a few of the women in the room going, urinal fly on the shopping list. They solved a problem in a way we hadn't seen before, and they solved a problem in a more effective way than we've seen before. I'll give you another quick example. Has anyone here seen Tontine now has use-by dates on their pillows? Isn't it amazing? For years we've been hearing about the bacteria and the ecosystem that grows in our pillows, and it's gross and it's disgusting, and we're all looking at our pillows thinking, just how yellow does it have to get before I change it? I know it's not just me. But now I've got a use-by date that tells me when to change the pillowcase, or change the pillow rather. Not new technology, we have use-by dates on tins of beans for years. All it took was someone looking in a slightly different direction, someone having a slightly different personality, bringing a slightly different perspective to a problem we've had for decades. Seeing the world in a new way is what creativity is really about. I'll give you one final example to close. Now, I mentioned to you earlier that I fly every day, and like most professional travellers, I never pay attention to the warning video at the beginning of a flight, unless I'm flying to New Zealand. Now, in 2012, when I flew to New Zealand, this is what the warning video looked like. Everyone in this video is completely naked and wearing only body paint, and they've got my attention. Now, I know they'll have cut this video at the critical moment, so there's no nipples or downstairs action, but we're all watching, desperately hoping they missed something. Last year when I flew to New Zealand, this is what the warning video looked like.
Kia ora, and welcome aboard this Air New Zealand flight.
Before we take off, we'd like to run you through a few in-flight safety exercises.
The only way is up. Hi everybody! In the next 3 minutes we're gonna work hard, work out, and get you fit to fly. Let's go! First, let's stretch it out and lose that baggage. Stretch it up to the overhead locker or slide it under the seat in front of you. Stretch and slide! Yeah! You're a giraffe!
Now tell me you're not paying attention to that. It's got the same boring information in it everyone else's warning video has. It's an insurance mandate, they have to run these. But all of a sudden we're paying attention. They've turned the most boring part of a flight into a commercial asset. They no longer make television ads because people pass their safety videos around on YouTube so much. Their most recent YouTube safety video, starring the All Blacks during the rugby test, got 20 million YouTube hits on the day it was released. There's only 5 million people in the country. 20 million YouTube hits. What they've done, though, is they haven't said, change who you are to engage with us. They've said, hang on, we're going to align with who you are so that you engage more fully. If that's the only thing you remember, remember the fact that success in every sphere of your life is less about your capacity or your competence or your skills or your talent or your intelligence, and more about your willingness and your capacity to understand the people you look to engage with. Thank you very much for your time today.